Good morning, everyone. Oh, good, you're with me here. Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here. I can't even recall when I was last in Nashville, but it's wonderful. And you're so kind to come out for what is such an important subject. I would like to begin with a couple of quotes. Our time is short. I have a lot I want to say, so let me begin right away. The first one comes from Leonard Swindler, intellectual leader, pastor, teacher, all the rest. He said as follows: 10 years, I would tell you, before 9/11, the following prophetic words. He wrote, "The future offers two alternatives, death or dialogue. Until the edge of the present era, humans lived in the age of monologue. That age is now passing. We are now poised at the entrance of the age of dialogue. Today, nuclear or ecological or other catastrophic devastation lies just a little bit further down the path of monologue. It is only by struggling out of the self-centered monologic mindset into dialogue with the other as they really are, and not as we have projected them in our monologues, that we can avoid such cataclysmic disasters." In other words, what he is arguing for is depth dialogue. And it is implicit in this reference, this telling phrase, the others as they really are. Dialogue is so much greater, you see, than simply trading information about the peculiarities of any religious community or the like. It's much more, you know this. A second quote, it comes from Agatha Christie. It's dated around 1920, Dead Man's Folly. It goes like the following. "Ah, Poirot looked at the snapshot. Yes, it is as you say, quite obvious when you have been told what it is. So much depends on how you look at a thing," laughed Warburton. "That is a very profound truth." In other words, it so depends on how you look at something. I would suggest to you, in speaking for the evangelicals this morning, I want to speak to them and I want to speak to you, but I want you to know that I'm giving an evangelical interpretation here so that the others who aren't here, who catch this by internet or otherwise after the fact, can listen and hear this and see from someone who has spent 40 years in the evangelical world why this is so important. Last week, a Sikh resident from the Chicago suburbs was brutally assaulted by a random stranger. The perpetrator told the man, "Terrorists, go back to your home, Bin Laden," before the victim fell unconscious. And this innocent individual, a father of two, was identified with terrorists, and bigotry was used to justify a horrific beating. Second illustration. We've heard it play out. We know the characters. I hardly need to mention their names, though I will. Donald Trump. I won't answer that question. Is Obama a Muslim or is he a Christian? I won't answer that question, he says. I've moved beyond that. And as for the question given to him, well, do we need to get rid of Muslims who are in training camps here in this country presenting a threat to us? He said, well, let's move on. Let's not answer that one. You're well aware. If you are, raise your hand. Well, I have a few hands. You've been watching the news. Third illustration. Ben Carson asked, would you have a Muslim as president? No. It's not in our American way. All three are illustrations of what is occurring in our country this day that makes the reason for us to be here very important. And so in speaking to the evangelicals, by the way, I should say, many, many years I worked for the NAE, 28 to be precise, until they decided I needed to go. For those of you who know that story, I gave a little too much fresh air to Terry Gross on Fresh Air. I suggested that, you see, there were these wide issues of whether or not we should care for our brother. Economic justice, even those who were LGBT by coming out for civil unions, but mostly for climate justice. These were the issues which she was asking about. She also, by the way, asked who I voted for, and I had the audacity to say who I did, and of course, it was about a week later I was asked to leave the association. I had been there 28 years. I didn't know I had to be so careful with my words. We do. You may have discovered this yourself. But I have a Bible study of sorts, if you'll forgive me. Evangelicals, we do this, and there will be evangelicals who would say, if you don't do this, then where are you coming from? So let me say where I'm coming from. I'm saying Luke 10:29, very quickly. This passage is so familiar, it's almost even dangerous. We all know the moral of Jesus' famous story, the Good Samaritan. Love your enemies. After all, that's what happens here. A man is traveling down a dangerous road when he's attacked by bandits, robbed, left for dead, and two men who come by who should have cared, don't. And then comes one who shouldn't care, but does, the Samaritan. Clean and simple, right. Well, maybe then again, maybe there's something more here that's going on. In other words, I don't have anything wrong with the classic moral of the story. God expects us to care for our neighbor, but to see our neighbor as anyone who is in need. That's the classic story. And in many ways, that's the issue at hand, you see, between the priest and the Levite. They see this man as a burden that delays them from accomplishing what they wanted to accomplish. The Samaritan, however, wherever he may go, or whatever he may be doing, he sees the man as a person in need, a child of God, as someone who inherently deserves his time and attention. And so I would suggest to you that's the traditional, and that's understandable, and that's acceptable, and that's right. God calls us to do more. He created all of us in the image of God. Christian, Jew, Muslim, Sikh, everyone. Now, you should know that's not in debate in evangelical circles, really, that we are all made in the image of God. What is really in debate is how should we treat one another? And it's to this question that then we get to, because you see, the lawyer asks this question, who is my neighbor? That is, who counts? Who am I responsible for? Falls into the purview of God's command to care for neighbor. We shouldn't be surprised by that question. Lawyers do that, by the way, don't they? Give a laugh for a lawyer. They parse, they qualify, they define elements of the law with great precision and care. And I suspect that rather than assume the lawyer is simply out to quote, get Jesus, he's trying to justify himself. And as we've already seen, Jesus responds by telling a story that redefines his neighbor, not in terms of race or religion. Oh, yes, not in terms of race or religion or any of it, yes, or proximity, but in terms of vulnerability, whatever is in need. But then he goes on to do something very interesting. He doesn't ask who was the Samaritan's neighbor, he asks who acted like a neighbor. The answer, of course, is obvious to the lawyer and us. It's the Samaritan who went out of his way. Okay, what's the point I'm making here? It's that suddenly the neighbor isn't simply the one in need, but rather the one who provides for our need, the one who takes care of us. And so as I look at our theme, our Muslim neighbor, I'm thinking about this from both perspectives. And the second one is maybe even more compelling than the first. That is the classic definition of who is my neighbor. The second one raises an uncomfortable question. Who has been our neighbor by caring for us of late? I would ask you. Because it's uncomfortable because, why, we're Americans, don't you know? We spend most of our time, energy, and our money trying to be invulnerable. Yeah, do I hear an amen? Try precisely, thank you, to need as little as possible from those around us. Perhaps a fear of being a burden or of owing others. Or that we are just afraid to be vulnerable because we show our need that may not be met. Whatever the reason, so many of us are mortified by the idea, myself included, by showing our deepest need to others and having a hard time receiving a compliment, let alone serious aid. But truth be told, it's this other part, being willing to receive aid and help, especially to and from those we don't normally see as like us. So perhaps the call isn't only to invite us to imagine those who we should be helping, but those who might help us if we give them a chance. That by way of a spiritual introduction. We are bound together by our shared need, by the awareness of our common vulnerability, by a sense that God has worked through some people to care for us and still wants to meet our needs through others. And so I'd ask you, whether Christian, Muslim, Sikh, or otherwise here today, Jewish or Buddhist or whatever, who has met your need? And we are invited to look around us to care for those similarly in need. Might we see ourselves, you see, as really the person, the traveler left for dead in the ditch by the road? Can we then rise up to meet others in need? By God's grace we do, and I believe we can. So that, here ends the reading of the Word. Thank you very much. A story. I looked it up. I was intrigued. I had actually read the story of the Cizik who was bludgeoned on the street in a Chicago suburb to look up the word bigot. Do you know where it comes from? If you know, raise your hand. If you don't, I would like to apprise you. I found it. It goes like this. The origins of the word bigot dates as far back as 1598, and according to Wikipedia, the story goes that when the Normans' Duke Rollo was marrying King Charles's daughter, he refused to kiss the king's foot in token of subjection, unless the king would hold it out for that specific reason. And when the king urged him to do it, when being urged to do it, Rollo answered hastily, "No, by God," whereupon the king called him bigot, which then passed from him to his people. So the Normans were the first victims. Did you get that? Bigot, no, by God. That's where it's at in the language. Thus began the use of the term, sometimes justifiably, other times not. But you see, it suggests not just the rejection of someone for their race or religion, but can be used to refer to intolerance to whole groups of people in general based on their characteristics, such as religion. And attacks against Muslim, Arab, South Asian Americans occur frequently in our society. Sometimes as hate crimes, sometimes not. But they are rooted in bigotry.